What's up, guys? This is Ultimate Device Vids, and whenever I make speed tests comparing iPhones to one another, people often ask me to make a video comparing iPhones on their original iOS firmwares to one another. And that's exactly what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be comparing the iPhone 6S on its original iOS 9 firmware to the latest iPhone 13 with iOS 15, which is of course its original firmware. So the goal of this video is to compare these two iPhones as they were when they were brand new by using the original software that they both shipped with respectively. And in addition to doing some app launching tests with the default stock iPhone applications, we're also going to be doing some app launching tests with some App Store apps as well. And the versions of these apps that are installed on the iOS 9 iPhone 6S are actually the same versions from the time that this version of iOS 9 was out. This 6S is running iOS 9.3.2, which was released in the spring of 2016. So I actually went out and installed the versions of these 5 applications from that time period. And they're not side-loaded or installed unofficially. They're installed 100% properly. I had to go through some pretty bizarre workarounds to get these older app versions installed, but I really wanted to do this because my goal with this device was to recreate an iPhone that could have been pulled straight from 2016 and brought into 2022 and compared against the latest iPhone on its original iOS at the time, with of course all of the latest versions of these applications, and that's what's running on the iPhone 13. And even though the iPhone 6S on the latest iOS 15 update has proven to perform amazing, I still just wanted to get that context of using an iPhone 6S in its prime on its original iOS with the applications that were out at that time in comparison to the iPhone 13 on the latest iOS 15 update with the latest versions of these apps. Just to kind of get the context between using the latest iPhone back in 2016 versus using the latest iPhone now. Also, both devices are running at their peak performance capability, as you can see on the iPhone 13, and the iPhone 6S on iOS 9 is also running at its peak performance capability, and I know this for a fact because Apple didn't even add the performance management features for battery health until a much later version of iOS. And let's kick things off with some default stock app launching tests. And as you can see, for lighter applications like this, the stock apps, it's a totally negligible difference, even with, again, so many years apart of generations and so many years apart of software versions. In my experience, all the iPhones that have been released in the last 7 years or so, even regardless of software versions, tend to open up applications like this super easily, very quickly. I just think we've gotten to a point where, the processors in modern iPhones can handle simple tasks like this at the drop of a dime instantly. Now, this being said, I did notice the iPhone 13 on iOS 15, no surprise, did open up these applications usually a split second quicker than the iOS 9 iPhone 6S. But again, it's nothing that you'd ever notice in day-to-day life. And as I said earlier, the iPhone 6S on iOS 15 in some of my previous videos has proven to be quite responsive as well. Oftentimes for simple applications, it's proven to be more responsive than older versions of iOS like this. But I still wanted to include this section of the video just to kind of get a sense for how these two devices compare again on their original iOS versions as they were when they were released. Just, getting into applications, seeing how the animations are, just the overall feel, but definitely a negligible difference in the grand scheme of things. And next, real quick, we're just going to do a consecutive app launching test, launching the same set of applications that we just launched, but now we're going to be doing them consecutively, one after the next, and we're going to show both devices doing this side by side to get an idea of what it's like switching between stock applications in fast succession. And as you can see, the iPhone 13 on iOS 15 is definitely in the lead here. Of course, in addition to the obvious processing power advantage that it has over the 6S on iOS 9, Apple has also just improved the animations of iOS quite a lot over the years. Not only is the app open animation quicker and snappier, but you're also able to quickly open up another application directly after you close the app that you're currently in. While on iOS 9, there is kind of a split-second delay, which you could see where you have to kind of wait before you're able to get into the next application. Of course, in day-to-day life, you're probably not going to be switching between applications this rapidly, but again, definitely a notable difference in terms of the overall physics of the animations. But in the grand scheme of things, just a few seconds difference, so both of them did perfectly fine, if you ask me. Next, we're going to do some app launching tests with those App Store applications. And once again, as I mentioned earlier, you definitely should keep in mind that, again, on the iPhone 6S on iOS 9, the 5 applications that we're using in this test are the 5 applications from the 2016 iOS 9 era. And of course, on the iPhone 13 on iOS 15, these are the latest versions of these apps. So the applications have no no doubt gotten a lot more complex and have grown quite a bit in this many years. But again, the real point of this video is just to kind of get that context of, again, what it was like using these applications back then versus now. And starting off with Instagram here, as you can see, very similar performance, but the iPhone 6S on iOS 9 with the older version of the app did open up just a fraction of a second quicker. Again, the differences that we're talking about here are just super negligible, but that's definitely not something that I see when I compare a 6S on the latest iOS 15 with the latest version of the app to an iPhone 13. Moving on to Google Maps here, and you can see for Google Maps there, very similar. The iPhone 13 won that one, again, just by a fraction of a second. And the older version of Amazon on the iOS 9 6S is no longer supported because the application is so old, so it redirects to Safari. But it kind of gave us an idea of how quick the application's interface was able to pop up. Very similar performance there, but the iPhone 13 was a fraction of a second quicker here. And in terms of the game applications, once again, extremely similar for Subway Surfers here, but the iOS 9 iPhone 6S with the iOS 9 era version of Subway Surfers did open once again a fraction of a second quicker than the iPhone 13 on iOS 15 with the latest version of the app. In terms of Minecraft, the iPhone 6S on iOS 9 with, again, the older iOS 9 era version of the app did open up a little bit quicker in this case as well. So applications have definitely gotten a lot more complex over the years. There's a lot more features, just a lot more packed under the hood. And for me, at least, it's interesting to sometimes see that, sometimes the older hardware, just with a simpler version of, specific applications, can even be faster than the newest hardware with the newest version. And we're going to do a quick biometrics test. Of course, Touch ID on the iPhone 6S and Face ID on the iPhone 13. But as is notoriously the case, Touch ID is just a fraction of a second quicker, and that's why a lot of people prefer it. But both are very fast in the grand scheme of things. And next, we're going to load a few web pages in Safari. And as I always say, of course, you should definitely keep in mind that a test like this largely depends on the internet connection that you're using. And also, in a test like this, of course, we're loading web pages from 2022, of course, on both of these devices. So in this case, it's pretty difficult to determine how the iPhone 6S back in 2016 would have reacted loading web pages from 2016, but loading new web pages on both devices, pretty comparable results in the grand scheme of things. For whatever reason, loading apple.com there did load quicker on the iOS 9 iPhone 6S, but I've gotten different results doing this exact same thing off camera a few times where the 13 was quicker and when they were both the same. So again, I think a lot of it just kind of depends on the internet connection that you're using and what's going on with it at the time. So all in all here, once again, I'd say very quick on both and perfectly fine. And in terms of scrolling speed, very smooth and responsive on both devices, on both iOS versions. However, the physics of scrolling on newer versions of iOS has changed quite a bit in comparison to older versions of iOS, as you could see. One single swipe will scroll much farther down the page on modern versions of iOS, where on older versions of iOS, you kind of had to scroll multiple times to get through the same distance on a page. And I do prefer the way that it is currently in iOS, just because you could scroll a lot quicker this way. It's kind of interesting to see some of the things that you forgot were changed or updated when you go back and use earlier versions of iOS. And there you guys have it. At the end of the day, of course, the fastest and overall best experience is always going to be on the latest iPhone, on the latest iOS version with all the latest apps. But I always find it interesting to kind of take a step back in time and just kind of compare how things were back then versus how they are now. And that being said, I think comparing these two devices does show that it's overall kind of a small difference just in terms of the overall speed of doing these same tasks all these years later. For the most part, it was just literally a few seconds difference, occasionally with the older device being a little bit quicker than the newer device. And again, I think that's primarily because certain applications and certain things have gotten a little more complicated over the years. It's also definitely worth mentioning that in this video, we mostly just focused on app launching. So if you ever find yourself doing more involved CPU intensive tasks, you'll definitely see a much more noticeable advantage on the iPhone 13, no doubt. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace out.